The rain hammered the roof of the sprawling Connecticut estate, each drop a reminder of how alone I was in this cavernous house. I was 24, broke, and house-sitting for my boss, Mr. Harrington, while his family vacationed in Tuscany. By night 3, I was sure the silence would swallow me whole. My name's Ethan Caldwell, a junior graphic designer scraping by at Harrington and Company, a boutique ad agency in Hartford. The gig was simple: water the plants, feed the cat, and keep the place from burning down. Easy money, I thought, until the front door creaked open on that stormy Thursday night, and a man I didn't expect stepped through. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair slicked back from the rain. His presence filled the foyer like a sudden gust of wind. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp, like a blade cutting through the quiet. "I'm Ethan," I stammered, clutching the cat, Muffin, like a shield. "I'm house-sitting for Mr. Harrington." His eyes, piercing blue, like a winter sky, narrowed. "I'm Daniel Harrington, Richard's father. And I wasn't told anyone would be here." My stomach dropped. Richard, my boss, hadn't mentioned his father. Not once. The man standing before me was supposed to be in London, running some international branch of the family business. Yet here he was, dripping wet, staring at me like I was an intruder. "You're early," I said, my voice thinner than I'd hoped. "And you're in my house?" he shot back, peeling off his soaked coat. He moved with a quiet authority, like he owned every inch of the world he walked on. I set Muffin down, trying to steady my hands. "Richard said 2 weeks. I've got the email." "Save it," Daniel interrupted, waving a hand. "I don't need proof. Just stay out of my way." That was the plan. Stay out of his way, do my job, and get out. But something about Daniel Harrington, his guarded eyes, the way his jaw tensed when he spoke, made it impossible to look away. Over the next few days, I tried to stick to the routine. Water the azaleas. Feed Muffin. Avoid the man who seemed to haunt the house like a ghost with a pulse. But Daniel was everywhere. In the kitchen at midnight, pouring whiskey into a crystal glass. In the library, flipping through old books with a frown that said he was searching for something he'd never find. And once, in the garden, where I caught him staring at the stars, his face softened in a way that made my chest ache. He wasn't what I expected. Richard had painted his father as a cold, distant workaholic, a man who'd rather broker deals than deal with people. But Daniel was different. He noticed things, like how I arranged the flowers in the vase to match the room's colors, or how I left extra food out for the stray cats in the backyard. "You're an artist," he said one evening, leaning against the kitchen counter as I chopped vegetables for dinner. His voice was softer now, less like a blade and more like a warm current. "Just a graphic designer," I corrected, my cheeks burning. "Nothing special." He tilted his head, studying me. "You see things others don't. That's special." I laughed it off, but his words stuck. So did the way his gaze lingered, like he was trying to solve a puzzle I didn't know I was. By the 5th night, the storm had passed, but a different kind of tension hung in the air. Daniel started joining me for dinner, not because I asked but because he just showed up. We'd sit at the long oak table, him with his whiskey, me with my cheap grocery store wine, talking about everything and nothing. Music, books, the way the city lights looked from the hill behind the house. He was 45, divorced, with a life that sounded like a series of closed doors. "I've spent years building walls," he said one night, his voice low, almost confessional. "Keeps things simple." "Simple's overrated," I replied, braver than I felt. He looked at me then, really looked, and I swear the room shrank. My heart was a drumbeat, loud and unsteady. I was just a kid from a small town, barely scraping by, and he was him, untouchable, forbidden. But the way he leaned closer, his fingers brushing mine as he passed me the salt, told me he felt it too. That night, in the garden, under a sky full of stars, everything changed. We were sitting on the old wooden bench, the one I'd noticed earlier with its weathered carvings. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine, and fireflies danced around us like tiny lanterns. "Why are you here, Ethan?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "House sitting," I said, but my throat was tight. "No," he said, turning to face me. His eyes were intense, searching. "Why are you here? With me?" I didn't have an answer, not one I could say out loud. So I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched his face. His skin was warm, rough with stubble, and for a moment he froze. Then he leaned into my touch, his eyes closing, and I knew we were crossing a line we couldn't uncross. The garden was our secret, a world carved out of moonlight and whispers. Daniel's hand found mine that night, his grip firm but careful, like he was holding something fragile. I wanted to ask what this meant, what we meant, but the words dissolved under the weight of his gaze. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Daniel humming in the kitchen. It was such a small thing, but it hit me like a freight train. This man, who carried himself like a fortress, was humming a tune I didn't recognize, flipping pancakes like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You're up," he said, glancing over his shoulder. His smile was hesitant, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to have it. "Barely," I said, rubbing sleep from my eyes. I sat at the counter, watching him move with a quiet grace that didn't match the stories I'd heard about him. The ruthless businessman, the absent father. None of it fit the man pouring batter onto a sizzling pan. We ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, full of things we weren't ready to say. I caught myself staring at the way his hands moved, strong and deliberate, and I wondered what it would be like to feel them again. That day we fell into a rhythm. I tended to the house, watering plants, checking the mail, while Daniel worked in his study, his voice carrying through the walls as he made calls to London or Tokyo. But every so often he'd find me, in the hallway, passing me a glass of water, in the library asking about the book I was reading. Each moment was a spark, building something I couldn't name. By evening, the tension was unbearable. We were in the living room, a fire crackling in the hearth, when he sat beside me on the couch. Too close, not close enough. "Ethan," he said, his voice low, "it's dangerous." I swallowed hard. "I know. Do you?" His eyes searched mine, and I saw the conflict there, want and fear tangled together. "I'm twice your age. I'm your boss's father. If anyone finds out, no one's here." I cut in, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's just us." He let out a breath, like he'd been holding it for years. Then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was hungry, desperate, like he'd been starving for this and didn't know it until now. My hands found his shoulders, pulling him closer, and for a moment the world was just us. Two people who shouldn't fit together but somehow did. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments. A brush of hands in the kitchen, a whispered conversation in the garden. Every touch felt like a rebellion against the rules we were breaking. But the more we tried to pull back, the deeper we fell. One night, as we lay tangled together on the couch, Daniel told me about his life. The marriage that crumbled under the weight of his ambition. The son, Richard, who barely spoke to him. The years he spent running from himself, burying his desires under work and whiskey. "I've never felt like this," he admitted, his voice raw. "Not with anyone." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe this could last. But doubt crept in, sharp and cold. What happened when Richard and his family came back? What happened when the world saw us? Two men, a generation apart, defying every expectation. The answer came sooner than I expected. On the 10th day, I found a letter in the mailbox, addressed to Daniel in Richard's sharp handwriting. I handed it to him without a word, my stomach twisting as he tore it open. His face darkened as he read. "They're coming home early," he said, his voice flat. "Tomorrow." The air left the room. Tomorrow. One word, and our fragile world cracked. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. He just pulled me close, his arms a shield against the storm we both knew was coming. The house felt different that morning, like it was holding its breath. Daniel and I moved through our routines in silence, the weight of Richard's return pressing down on us. Every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the grandfather clock, was a countdown to the end of whatever we'd built. I was in the garden, pruning the roses, when Daniel found me. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed with something heavier than exhaustion. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight. I set the shears down, my hands shaking. "About what?" "About this. Us." He gestured between us, like he was trying to pin down something that kept slipping away. "Richard can't know. No one can." The words hit like a punch. I knew he was right. Connecticut wasn't exactly a small town, but gossip traveled fast, and Richard was the kind of man who valued appearances above everything. Still, hearing Daniel say it out loud made my chest ache. "So we hide?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. He flinched. "It's not that simple, Ethan. You're young. You've got a whole life ahead of you. I'm a complication." "You're not a complication," I snapped. "You're the first thing in years that feels real." He looked at me then, his eyes soft and raw, like I'd cracked something open inside him. But before he could respond, the sound of tires on gravel cut through the air. They were here. Richard's SUV pulled into the driveway, sleek and black, like a storm cloud rolling in. I watched from the garden as he stepped out, his wife and 2 kids trailing behind. He was all smiles, clapping Daniel on the shoulder like they were old friends instead of father and son. "Ethan," Richard called, spotting me. "Didn't expect you to still be here. Hope my old man didn't give you too much trouble." I forced a smile, my heart pounding. "No trouble at all." Daniel's eyes met mine, a silent plea to keep our secret. I nodded, barely, and turned back to the house. That night, dinner was torture. Richard dominated the conversation, talking about their trip, the vineyards, the art galleries. His wife, Emily, chimed in with practiced enthusiasm, while the kids played with their food. Daniel and I sat at opposite ends of the table, avoiding each other's gaze. But I felt him. Every time his hand brushed his glass, every time he shifted in his seat, it was like a current running through me. I wanted to scream, to tell them everything, to claim this thing we'd found. But I couldn't. After dinner, I retreated to the guest room, my temporary sanctuary. I was packing my things, ready to leave the next morning, when Daniel knocked on the door. "We can't keep doing this," he said, stepping inside. His voice was low, urgent. "Not here. Not now." "Then when?" I asked, my voice breaking. "When is it ever going to be okay for us?" He didn't answer. Instead, he crossed the room and kissed me, hard and desperate, like he was trying to memorize me before I slipped away. I clung to him, my fingers digging into his shoulders, willing time to stop. But it didn't. The next morning, I was gone before anyone woke up. I left a note for Richard, thanking him for the gig, and drove back to my cramped apartment in Hartford. The city felt emptier than before, like it was missing something vital. Days turned into weeks. I threw myself into work, designing ads for car dealerships and local restaurants, trying to drown out the memory of Daniel's touch. But every night, alone in my bed, I saw his face, his eyes, the way he'd looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. Then one evening my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the garden. Midnight. D." My heart stopped. I didn't know if it was a beginning or an end, but I knew I'd be there. The garden was just as I remembered, jasmine-scented, alive with fireflies, the wooden bench glowing faintly under the moon. I stood there, my breath visible in the cool night air, waiting for Daniel. My heart was a war drum, beating out hope and fear in equal measure. He appeared like a shadow, stepping out from the darkness of the trees. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were the same, piercing, searching, pulling me in. "You came," he said, his voice rough, like he hadn't spoken in days. "You asked," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's this about, Daniel?" He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, even in the chilly night. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said. "I tried. God, I tried. But it's you, Ethan. It's always you." The words broke something in me, something I'd been holding together with sheer will. I wanted to reach for him, to pull him close, but I held back. "What about Richard? Your family? The world out there?" He shook his head, his jaw tight. "I don't have answers. All I know is I've spent my life running from who I am. I'm done running." Before I could respond, he kissed me. It was softer this time, less desperate, but no less intense. It was a promise, a vow, and I felt it in every fiber of my being. We sat on the bench, our hands entwined, and talked until the stars began to fade. He told me about the years he'd spent hiding, the relationships he'd buried under duty and fear. I told him about growing up in a small town, where being different meant being invisible. We were two people who'd spent our lives on the outside, finally finding a place to belong. But reality wasn't far behind. The next day, Richard called me into his office. His face was hard, his eyes cold. "You were at the house last night," he said. It wasn't a question. I froze, my mind racing. I forgot something. Went back to grab it. He leaned forward, his voice low. "Don't lie to me, Ethan. I saw you. With him." The air left my lungs. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. "My father," he continued, his voice dripping with disgust, "has a reputation to uphold. This family has a reputation. Whatever you're doing, it stops now." "It's not like that," I said, my voice shaking. "It's not just. I don't care what it is," he snapped. "You're fired. Get out." The words hit like a slap. I'd known the risks, but losing my job, my lifeline, felt like the ground crumbling beneath me. I left the office in a daze, my future unraveling with every step. That night, I met Daniel at a diner on the edge of town. He looked wrecked, his eyes red-rimmed, his hands unsteady. "Richard knows," he said. "He confronted me this morning." "What did you tell him?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "The truth," he said. "That I love you." The world stopped. Love. He'd said it plain and raw, like it was the only truth that mattered. I reached across the table, my hand finding his, and for a moment, nothing else existed. But the world didn't stop for us. Richard's threats grew sharper. He vowed to cut Daniel off from the family business, to ruin his name. The pressure was suffocating, and I could see it wearing Daniel down, carving lines into his face I hadn't noticed before. "We could leave," I said one night, lying beside him in a cheap motel room we'd escaped to. "Start over somewhere new." He looked at me, his eyes heavy with doubt. "And give up everything? My family? My life?" I didn't have an answer. All I had was him, and the fragile hope that it would be enough. The motel room was a temporary refuge, its peeling wallpaper and flickering lights a stark contrast to the Harrington estate. Daniel and I lay there, our breaths sinking in the quiet, as the weight of our choices pressed down. We were two men caught in a world that wasn't ready for us, fighting for a love that felt both inevitable and impossible. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure from Richard didn't let up. He froze Daniel's accounts, locked him out of the family business. Whispers spread through Hartford's elite circles, painting Daniel as a disgrace, me as the reckless kid who'd seduced him. I didn't care what they said about me, but watching Daniel bear the brunt of it, his shoulders hunched, his eyes distant, tore me apart. One night, as rain battered the motel windows, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. "I'm ruining your life, Ethan," he said, his voice breaking. "You're young. You could start over without me dragging you down." I knelt in front of him, forcing him to meet my eyes. "You're not ruining anything. You're the best part of my life." He shook his head, but I held his face, my thumbs brushing away the tears he didn't want me to see. "We'll figure this out," I said. "Together." The turning point came unexpectedly. Emily, Richard's wife, showed up at the motel one morning. I braced for another lecture, another ultimatum, but her face was soft, her eyes kind. "I've seen how he looks at you," she said to me, her voice steady. "I've never seen Daniel happy before. Not like this." I blinked, stunned. "You're not angry?" she sighed, glancing at Daniel, who stood frozen by the door. "Richard's angry enough for both of us. But I know what it's like to hide who you are. I won't let him destroy you for it." Emily's support was a lifeline. She convinced Richard to back off, to let Daniel keep a small stake in the business. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Slowly, Daniel began to rebuild. Not the life he'd had, but a new one with me. We moved to a small apartment in New Haven, far enough from Hartford to breathe, close enough to stay connected. I found freelance design work, and Daniel started consulting, using his years of experience to help small businesses. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. One evening, we returned to the Harrington Garden, now under new owners. The bench was still there, its carved words faded but legible. We sat there, hand in hand, watching the fireflies dance. "We made it," I whispered, my head resting on his shoulder. He kissed my forehead, his voice soft but sure. "We did. Our love wasn't perfect. It was messy, hard-won, scarred by the battles we'd fought. But it was real, and it was enough." In that garden, under the same stars where it all began, I realized that sometimes the greatest victories come from refusing to let go. The world wasn't ready for us, but we were ready for it, and that was enough.